Healing the Rancher by Melinda Curtis. Prologue. I can ride the creek trail faster than you. 9-year-old Kendall Monroe had told her two older brothers that last night after they boasted about their race times at dinner. This summer, she decided she wasn't going to be left behind or counted out because she was little. And she wasn't going to stick to horses who were nags. Monroes were tough. She wanted to prove it. I can ride the creek trail faster than you. She was eating those words now. Kendall trudged toward the pasture gate, where her father's runaway horse stood waiting for her, reins dangling to the ground, hooves caked in mud. Kendall didn't look much better. Her shirt was untucked, one sleeve torn and her boots muddy. The closer Kendall got to the gate, the more the tears threatened to return. Do not cry. Holden and Bo would never let her forget it. As if on cue, her two older brothers came out of the barn on the other side of the fence, spotted her and started to laugh. Their laughter undercut her pride until she felt small and useless and wanted to go home. Home was thousands of miles away in Philadelphia in a grand mansion that made the ranch in Texas seem shabby. Ginger, the old ranch hand who was in charge of the Monroe kids this summer, strode out of the barn with that bow-legged gait of hers and a scowl. What in the world? Chin thrust in the air, Kendall snatched Brandy's reins and stifled a groan of pain. Her backside hurt where she'd fallen. And that wasn't all. Her body ached all over. It hurt just to reach for the reins. Plus, her forearm was scraped and it stung, along with a welt on her palm where a fire ant had bitten her. She'd lost her cowboy hat and her nose felt like it was getting sunburned, despite it being early in the morning. The Texas summer sun was as cruel as the creek trail. That horse better not be injured. Ginger opened the gate and took Brandy's reins. I can tell from the way you look that you did something foolish. I don't care if you do something foolish on foot, but leave the horses out of it. She led the mare away. Kendall shut the gate. That's when her older brothers closed in. Where did you fall? Jumping the creek, I bet. Holden laughed. He was 15 and a stick in the mud, practically perfect in the eyes of the family and, unlike Kendall, was transitioning easily from life in Philadelphia to summers in Texas. You can't just look like you're a good rider, Ken. You have to work at it. She sucked her lips into her mouth, trying not to say a word. Or worse, sob, because tears backed up in her throat thicker than too much peanut butter on a dry cracker. I bet you got dumped at Rattlesnake Bend. Bo was 13 and found everything Kendall did amusing. He grinned at her. Wow, Ken. Were you dragged through the creek bed? She had been, although thankfully not far before her boot slipped free of the stirrup. Still, Kendall refused to answer Bo. She needed a shower, a clean set of clothes and a hug, not teasing or laughter at her expense. Mom appeared on the front porch, looking like she was headed into town, what with her high heels and high hair. Don't tell Mom you fell, Holden whispered, leaning closer. We're supposed to be watching out for you. And don't you dare cry. Bo turned, facing Kendall as he walked backward toward the house. You were warned. Ginger told you to practice more in the arena before gallivanting around. Kendall hated practicing, if only because she was the youngest and everyone was quick to point out how unskilled she was. I can't wait to tell the Monroe cousins. Bo was absolutely gleeful. They're coming tonight. 9 more kids to tease me? Ugh. Mom caught sight of them and gasped. Kendall! Are you okay? Yes. Kendall plodded forward, trying once more not to cry. When she reached the front porch, her mother did a quick examination, feeling Kendall's head for bumps, holding out her arms to check for wounds and bruises, gently prodding her ant bite. You're showing some wear and tear, Mom said finally and with a sigh. But I think you'll live. Mom drew Kendall into a make-it-better hug that didn't judge. The tears came then. What's this? Grandpa Harlan opened the screen door, a concerned expression on his tanned, wrinkled face. "This," Mom stood, placing one hand on Kendall's shoulder. "This is a strong young woman. Someday, she'll be one of the most important Monroes. She'll do important things. I can't wait." Kendall nearly burst with pride. She scrubbed away her tears. Grandpa Harlan nodded. "She's tough, that one. Full of potential. That she is." Taking Kendall's hand, Mom led the way to the bathroom, where she ran a hot bath and brought Kendall clean clothes. She didn't lecture. She didn't hover. But she was there in case Kendall needed another hug, which she did. Later that morning, Kendall stood inside the living room, watching her brothers riding in the arena. Grandpa Harlan came to stand next to her, smelling like he'd just finished smoking a cigar. He looked into Kendall's eyes. His gentle smile was framed by bushy gray sideburns that ended halfway down his chin. "Are you still mad at the boys for teasing you?" Kendall shrugged, because even at 9 she knew the teasing was just the half of it, but she wasn't quite sure what the other half that upset her was. "You know, being family involves a little sacrifice and a little forgiving, and that includes forgiving yourself." Her grandfather spoke in a low voice meant just for her. And she knew. She knew there was more to what he was telling her. But she didn't get it. Her body hurt and her feelings hurt, all because of the horse and her brothers. What had she done that she needed to forgive herself? "Give yourself time," Grandpa Harlan said, further complicating his message as he added, "Do you know the secret to my success?" Kendall shook her head, taking note of her grandfather's faded checked shirt and his worn blue jeans. "Is it because you don't buy fast cars?" She'd heard her father say that once. His smile spread. "No." Kendall peeked out to where the boys were riding in circles with Ginger shouting instructions from the center of the arena. She sighed. Circles were boring, Ginger was too strict, and Kendall had no idea how her grandfather had become a gazillionaire. "Is it because you bought a lot of houses?" She'd heard her uncle say that once. "No," Grandpa Harlan chuckled. "My secret is knowing how to pick myself up after things don't work out," with a smile. "I don't let my pride get in the way." He bent until his face was level with hers, placing his hands on his knees. "I've never done anything perfect the first time around." He gave the ends of Kendall's long black hair a gentle tug, before turning his head and glancing outside. "He's gonna make me get back on a horse." Kendall grabbed hold of her grandfather's bushy sideburns and brought him back to face her. "I'm not going riding again." Because she may only be 9, but she knew what talks alone with Grandpa Harlan meant. You had to forget about whatever bad had just happened and try again. "I'm done with horses and mud," and her throat nearly closed, being laughed at. He covered her hands with his, still smiling. "Being good at something takes practice. And if you stumble or fall, they'll laugh at me." Kendall slid her hands free and leaned on the windowsill. "I don't like being teased." That was it. From now on, she was going to be perfect.
Chapter 1. Of all her adult female Monroe cousins, Kendall Monroe was the woman who most dearly loved a good pair of high heels. Sandals, preferably. 6 inches, ideally. This year's latest release, for sure. Oh, her cousin Laurel might have argued that as a fashion designer, she was in the running for the Monroe most likely to keep up appearances. But since Laurel had taken up residence in a small, rural town in Idaho and had twins, and since Kendall still lived in downtown Philadelphia, she was going to assume the coveted title was now officially hers. Whoever held the title could opt out of non-holiday events held at the Monroe family ranch in Texas. For the record, Kendall loathed the family ranch in Texas. And dirt. And creepy crawlies. Not to mention snakes, scorpions, larger-than-life fire ants, ornery horses who thought they knew more than she did, and superior-minded relatives in cowboy hats who made perfection on horseback seem easy. Seriously. Texas wasn't for Kendall, which meant ranching wasn't for Kendall. And on the whole, her Monroe siblings and cousins were fine with that. So it was a surprise when she got a call from an unknown Texas number on her cell phone and heard the distinct South Texas twang on the other end of the line. Did y'all know you're harder to track down than a fox on his nightly visit to the henhouse? Who is this? Kendall was walking in downtown Philadelphia as she'd tapped her earbud to answer, carrying 2 shopping bags filled with 5 pairs of shoes because there had been a sample sale at her favorite fashion designer showroom. Who could resist a boutique shoe sale? Not Kendall. This is Carol Connolly of the East Texas Canellas. You may have heard of us out at the C-Bar C. We've got the largest herd of Gelbvieh in the West, which means our product has more demand than those computer chips people are so short of, and we've got a challenge ahead of us. We've been presented with the opportunity to be the exclusive Southern supplier of beef too. Excuse me. Kendall paused at an intersection, waiting for the light to change. Are you sure you have the right person? This is Kendall Monroe. Oh, darlin' Dot. Carol chuckled. You're the sweetest thing. Haven't you heard that women need to be more assertive? Of course, I was looking to connect with you, Miss Kendall Monroe. You're the one who posted all those fun photos and videos on social media with that boat captain cousin of yours. Daddy thinks your campaign looked staged, but I told him no woman plans to take photos like that with bags under her eyes and lipstick smudged on her teeth. Another chuckle interrupted Carol's diatribe. Slightly annoyed, Kendall ran her tongue over her front teeth as she crossed the street, moving from the shade of one high-rise into the muggy, September afternoon sunshine. She had indeed recently gone on a road trip with her cousin Olivia, a now retired, sailboat racing captain. She'd also taken photos and video of their girl trip and posted them online. But she'd done so to celebrate life with her cousin, not as any promotional campaign. And she'd had to be talked into lowering her guard when it came to polished appearances, not to mention reluctantly participating in activities she'd never have done otherwise, like mountain biking and jetpack rides across the water. Thanks for reaching out, Carol, but that doesn't explain why you've called me about Gilbert. Gelbvieh. Carol huffed a little. I was under the impression that you knew about Ranch Inn and that I wouldn't need to be educating you. Gelbvieh. I assure you that I am educated. Kendall had a degree from Brown in communications and had spent the last 10 years working in public relations for her family. She reached her car and stowed her purchases in the trunk, ready to escape the muggy heat and the blazing sunshine on the side of the street. And I'm experienced. Good, because Daddy says we aren't hirin' no city slicker. He wants a real country girl to handle our business. Across the street, a man in a truck slowed down, opened the vehicle's door and dropped a good-sized box at the curb before driving off. Hey, don't do that! Kendall shouted at the guy before sliding behind the wheel of her brand-new, leased coupe. The car had heated and air-conditioned seats, knew how to parallel park itself and was quicker on the brake than she was. Are you talking to me? Carol asked, all high on her horse. No. There was a guy littering. And Kendall was a Philly girl, after all. Folks from Philly weren't shy about calling out jerks. You haven't said what your business is. And frankly, Carol, I'm not sure you can afford my retainer. Although Kendall wasn't sure what that should be. She hadn't worked for anyone except family. Ever. But things had changed in the last year. Her grandpa Harlan, the family patriarch and founder of many successful companies, had died and left his businesses to his 4 sons, the only condition being that they could no longer employ or financially support any of his grandchildren. Hello, unemployment and eviction. Goodbye, professional swagger. On a positive note, rumor in the family had it that the condition was only going to be for a year. Hoping the rumor was true, Kendall had been living on savings and doing some unpaid social media and public relations work for her siblings and cousins. But now, her funds were running precariously low. She'd been thinking it was time to branch out on her own and find a job elsewhere, hence the leased luxury car, recently updated wardrobe and new designer shoes. She'd wanted to live the leader look as she pitched her services to celebrities and companies on the East Coast. A flap on the dropped box on the sidewalk moved. Kendall kept her eye on it as she put her car into the mode to pull out of the space parallel to the curb between 2 delivery vans. The dashboard lit up and played a short musical interlude reminiscent of a spa experience rather than the stress she associated with parallel parking and unparking. Carol had been talking nonstop the entire time. And I don't think you understand how huge this opportunity is. Burger by the Layer is one of the fastest growing gourmet burger chains in the country, and they credit that growth to their fun, grassroots, social media campaign. We need us one of those. The box flap moved again. A white kitten cautiously inched its way out of the box. Kendall hit the brakes and put the car in park, front end jutting into the street. Carol, there's a kitten. Hold that thought, will you? A kitten? I thought some guy was lit Aaron. The jerk dumped the kitten. Kendall got out, crossed the street to the opposite sidewalk and picked up the little ball of fluff, who immediately clawed her way up Kendall's pink sweater and rooted her way to the hair behind Kendall's neck, trembling. Farther up the road, someone honked, which for downtown Philly wasn't unusual. Kendall paid the horn no mind and checked the box for more kittens, relieved to find it was empty. It was hot and she was ready to get back in her air-conditioned car, where she could figure out what to do with the kitten. The horn blared again. This time closer. A city bus was approaching from one direction and Kendall turned around just as a huge semi-truck avoided the oncoming bus and sideswiped Kendall's front fender and continued on its way. My car! The kitten applied its claws to Kendall's neck as if afraid the truck was coming for it next. People came out of buildings up and down the block. Someone was already on the phone with the police and said, "Yes, I'd like to report a car accident." Kendall, are you okay? Was that crunching noise what I think it was? Hit and run? Kendall hadn't even taken the license plate number. She wanted to cry. I put less than 100 miles on that car. She had hoped it would be her inner sanctum. And she hadn't taken that extra insurance in case the car was totaled. She was going to be out several $1,000s, practically the last of her savings. Kendall gently brought the kitten from behind her neck to beneath her chin, instinctively giving it a snuggle. I'm sorry, Carol, you were saying? Net, darlin', we trust a Texan with our business. Daddy knew your granddaddy and has been to your family's spread in these parts. He wants you to come out to the old homestead and stay a while. Not that he doesn't trust a Monroe. Carol tittered. But he wants to make sure you know the front end of a steer from the back end. Are you offering to hire me? The kitten purred. My fee is. Daddy already talked to your cousin Shane Monroe, who gave him a ballpark retainer figure. Carol named a sum that was ridiculously high, ridiculously tempting and ridiculously needed, given the state of Kendall's car. You just have to get on out here and ride the range with Daddy. He may be 70, but he works the ranch like a young'un and he'll only do business with someone who'll do the same. He's having a little procedure done next week, but in 2 weeks or so he's gonna be back to managin' cattle and ridin' fence. Work a ranch? There'd be dirt and horses. And paychecks. Kendall glanced down at her expensive, black, 6-inch heeled, cutaway pumps. Can I get back to you? Of course, honey. You were just in an accident. I'll get those chairs ready to put in the wagon and send you the particulars. Kendall thanked her and hung up, not even trying to decipher the meaning of Carol's words. She lifted the kitten so she could look it in the eyes. Well, Boo, after calls to a tow service and my insurance agent, it looks like the third person I need to call is my cousin Shane. He had some
Chapter 2. Did you make an appointment with the Dr. Finn? No. Finn McAfee grabbed a hay bale by its binding and carried it from the stack in the ranch yard into the barn. Dr. Carlisle said the follow-up was optional. His mother made a derisive sound. That's not what she said. Her voice trembled through his phone's earbuds. Dr. Carlisle said recommended. Don't gamble with your health. I'm not. They got everything during surgery a month ago, Mom. Finn hefted the hay bale onto the stack on the barn's lift platform. You, your father and me. Mom sounded like she'd choked back a sob. That's all the reliable family Lizzie's got left since Jenny died. Lizzie being his daughter and Jenny his wife. Finn leaned on the hay bale, hating that he was upsetting his mother, hating that the follow-up treatment was energy sapping and body function changing, hating that he was a one-man show on the McAfee ranch. If he was sidelined, or experienced long-lasting side effects, he'd fall behind, on everything, including his plans for the future. He'd had the procedure to cut out the melanoma. They'd said they'd gotten it all. He'd missed half a day of work for the surgery, had 2 weeks of limited physical exertion and missed half a day to get his stitches removed. For a single dad who ran a cattle ranch by himself, he'd missed all the work he could afford. "Promise me you'll think about it," Mom said quietly. "You have to be thinking about it or you wouldn't have asked me to find you a single woman to date, one who's willing to live in second chance." Finn promised nothing if it meant thinking about cancer. He stood and wiped the sweat from his brow, glancing around. The barn was unusually quiet. Lizzie, his 4-year-old, was nowhere in sight. "Mom, I'll call you later." "Finn." He hung up on her, turning back to the daunting stack of hay. It had been delivered while he was moving the herd earlier. If he'd been here, he would have paid extra to have the hay transferred to his loft. He glanced up at the gathering rain clouds and sent up a prayer, "Don't rain yet." Not until he was done. But he couldn't finish moving hay until he had eyes on Lizzie. Lizzie had a habit of disappearing on him when his back was turned. And since they lived alone on a large cattle ranch in the remote mountains of Idaho, there was no safe place for her to wander off to. "Lizzie." He tilted his cowboy hat back, scanning the ranch yard for her bouncy blonde curls and pink boots, listening for a reply. The only answer came from the chicken coop, and the soft clucking of hens. Finn tried a different approach. "Peanut. Come here, boy. And bring your charge with you." Peanut was their golden retriever. He was usually good about sounding off if Lizzie was getting in trouble, or running to Finn when he was called if Lizzie was nearby. Nothing. Finn's worry meter ratcheted up a notch. "Lizzie. Peanut." Not for the first time today, Finn railed at the universe for taking his wife 2 years ago. Being both a father and a rancher hadn't been hard when Jenny had been alive. Now, everything was difficult, and the future was at risk. He poked his head in the barn, saw nothing and jogged around to the back, where the misfits were corralled. He counted 4 heads: Larry the llama, Doug the donkey, Evie the emu, Gary the goat. They all stared at him. No Lizzie or Peanut. Finn completed the circuit around the barn, stopping at the attached henhouse. No little girl sat inside petting Chicky Chicken, their Rhode Island red hen. No dog stood watch outside the gate. Worry increased to fear. Finn jogged across the ranch yard to the house, continuing to call their names. Still no answer. He opened the door and charged in, about to bellow the names of the missing when he noticed a muddy trail of tiny footsteps on the hardwood entwined with large, canine paw prints. They wound their way toward the living room. Finn came around the corner. His daughter was asleep on the couch, muddy cowboy boots discarded at her feet. Peanut was snuggled against her, watching Finn with a calm gaze that seemed to say, "I've got this." Relief flooded Finn's veins. He sank onto a chair and washed his hands over his face, pressing one palm over the scar tissue on his left cheek, running his right hand around to the scar on the back of his neck, where they'd cut out the melanoma. Relief gave way to melancholy. The old house was quiet. Bedrooms that had been filled with family for decades were barren. No dishes or pans clattered with life in the kitchen. There were no voices, was no laughter, in the hall. "You didn't prepare me for this, Jenny." His childhood sweetheart hadn't prepared him for the void she left after succumbing to lung disease. For the breath-stealing moments of joy and heart-pounding moments of fear he faced alone. Him. A heavily decorated, heavily scarred former Marine who looked anything but ready for the role of single father to a toddler girl. And now, cancer. They got it all. That's what Dr. Carlisle said. That's what he wanted to believe. Peanut thumped his tail without moving another muscle, a habit he'd developed because Lizzie was sometimes a light sleeper. That was telling. Even the dog knew not to wake Finn's little dynamo. Finn made the stop gesture with his hand and snuck back outside, where it was just beginning to sprinkle. If he hurried, he could get the rest of the hay into the barn before any significant harm came to his feed order, or Lizzie woke up from her nap. But the rest of his to-do list was going to have to wait until Lizzie was awake, fed and gently lectured, again, about the need to stay out of trouble and stick with him. He just hoped that one day his lecture would sink in. "What are you doing in town this late?" Mackenzie greeted Finn and Lizzie after dinner that night as they entered Second Chance's general store. Mac looked like she'd had a long day. Her green grocery apron was stained, and her brown gaze seemed weary. Like him, Mac ran her own business. Like him, she was a hard worker. On paper, she'd be a good candidate to date. Truth be told, he'd like to have more kids, a large family to fill the big, old house on the ranch. But when he looked at Mac, there was no spark of attraction, no curiosity about what made her tick. "I'm closing soon," Mac told them. "Won't be long." "We're out of bubble bath?" Finn led Lizzie to the small selection of soaps and shampoos a few aisles back. "And someone is determined to have a bath tonight." "Ducks need baths, Daddy." Lizzie pretended to be a duck, flopping her bent arms and occasionally quacking as she followed him. A crate of ducklings had been left on their doorstep when they were behind the barn feeding the misfits after dinner. It was a mystery how people knew the McAfee ranch was a haven for unwanted or injured animals. Jenny had started taking in broken stock when they'd gotten married 5 years ago. But she'd been gone 2 years now. Quack, quack, quack. "Nice, ducky," Finn told her, grabbing the bubble bath just as Lizzie grabbed a yellow shower puff. "You've got one like that at home, love." His daughter held up the yellow puff to him, a plea in her big blue eyes. "But it's not the color of baby ducks?" She smiled like the well-behaved angel he hoped she'd one day become, melting his heart. "All right. Come on." He led Lizzie to the sales counter, glancing at the bulletin board behind Mackenzie. "No one's asked about my job posting?" "The one that said, ranch hand wanted. Room and board plus pay." "Had a guy in earlier look at it, but he didn't seem interested." Mackenzie shook her head. "Have you tried advertising down in Ketchum or Boise?" "Yeah." Somehow, in the course of him helming the family property, he developed a reputation as a hard boss. Him. Savior of orphan ducklings. Go figure. Movement outside caught Finn's eye. 2 trucks pulled in. The first was a shiny, new gray pickup he didn't recognize that parked in front of the store. The second was a beat-up, blue and white pickup pulling a stock trailer that stopped next to a gas pump. A familiar, run-down-looking cowboy got out from the old truck. His cowboy hat brim was smashed in front, as if he'd walked into a wall. The broken straw ends poked out, as prickly as the man's drunken personality. Finn glanced down at Lizzie, who was oblivious to the traffic outside. She clung to the checkout counter as she watched Mackenzie punch buttons on the cash register. Maybe she wouldn't see her maternal grandfather. Maybe I won't feel guilty for keeping them apart for a year. A man and a woman entered, having arrived in that newer truck. Instinctively, Finn turned his face away as they passed, lowering the left brim of his cowboy hat to cover his scars. "How can you have blown your savings?" The tall cowboy grumbled, scowling at the woman as he stood in front of a display of wine. "You're my sister." "Sister?" That was surprising. The woman was dressed for the city, fancy high-heeled half-boots, jeans that clung to every outline of her body, a flowery, flouncy blouse and dangly earrings. Her thick, long black hair was straight, and fell smoothly over her shoulders. She was a rare bird up here, a looker, and if it hadn't been for Lizzie and his scars, Finn might have looked his fill. Mac rang up Finn's purchases while he sent covert glances toward the other customers. "Money management is my thing, Kendall," the tall cowboy continued with obvious disdain. "I could have helped you months ago. You'll be broke by year's end." "Broke, broke, broke," as little Adam would say. "Broke, broke, broke," the woman named Kendall said, mimicking the man as she propped a hand on her hip. "I didn't plan on being laid off, totaling my car, or spending a fortune repeatedly visiting my family in Second Chance this year." She shook herself a little, like a duck shedding excess water. And suddenly, she didn't look nearly as annoyed. "Stop worrying. I've got this. I have prospects." "You have one prospect and it's a long shot." Still scowling, the cowboy glanced down at his sister's feet and her black, shiny half-boots, the ones no self-respecting rancher would wear to work in. "You shouldn't gamble with the roof over your head. At the very least, you could have cut back on your clothing budget." "Leave it, Holden. If I wanted a lecture, I'd go see Dad." Kendall's gray-eyed gaze bounced from her brother to the front door. "I'm worried about Shane. He looked awful in the hospital. And the doctor said he needed surgery to stop the internal bleeding." Holden. Shane. Names started to click. These were Monroes. The Monroes had inherited the town of Second Chance last winter, and although they'd gotten a rocky start in town, they were now making good things happen. New jobs were opening up, new businesses, too. Things in the sleepy town were changing as they headed into another winter. Now if only some cowboys in need of work would move to town. Mac recited the total of Finn's purchases. He pulled out his wallet, noticing Lizzie's attention shift to the Monroe woman and stay there. Finn could relate. Even now, his eyes kept moving in her direction. 2 black eyes. A punctured lung. Internal bleeding. Kendall hugged herself. He could have died. It could be worse, Holden said quietly. Shane was lucky you were talking to him when he ran off the road and crashed. After you called me, Bernadette and I found him quickly. Since she's Dr. Carlisle to everybody else, she had him airlifted to Boise straight away. The tall cowboy turned his attention to the wine selection, rubbing a hand over his chest as if the episode had been upsetting. But now Franny and everyone at the Bucking Bull are going to be focused on his recuperation. You'd just be in the way over there. This time, it was Kendall who frowned. I spent summers on our Texas ranch, same as you, Holden. I can help Franny feed and water stock, muck out stalls, even saddle a horse. Even saddle a horse. She sounded like a greenhorn. Finn almost laughed. All I need, Kendall continued, is to brush up on my ranching skills and lingo so old man Connolly approves me to promote his ranch on social media. I'll give it a few days and then ask if Franny could use my help at the Bucking Bull. Finn is looking for a ranch hand. Mackenzie slid Finn's purchases across the counter, nodding at him. He's got a big spread, a large herd of cattle, and he's always in need of help. I bet you could work something out. The 2 Monroes turned to stare at Finn. He knew what they'd see right off: the stained blue jeans, his dusty brown cowboy hat and scuffed cowboy boots. The things that said he was no hobby rancher. What they couldn't see, because his face was averted and whiskers partially covered his jawline, were his scars. He didn't want to show them, didn't want to see their reaction or hear their hastily made excuses about how his ranch, his knowledge, wasn't right for Kendall. Grrr. He was simultaneously angry at the world and sickened with himself for this weakness. He was a former Marine, a ranch owner and a dad. He should hold his head high and set a good example for Lizzie. Self-chastised, Finn faced the pair head-on, letting them see his left cheek and his scars. Sorry, but I'm not running a dude ranch. Kendall didn't flinch. Her gaze didn't fall from his. Her expression didn't turn pitying. Nor did she gasp in horrified surprise. She was a class act. But on the other hand, she didn't admit she was far from qualified to be his ranch hand. She just stared. Finn put up a flyer. Mac ripped down the flyer and held it toward the Monroes. Advertising for help. Ranching is hard up here. Hands are hard to come by. That's enough, Mac, Finn said as kindly as he was able to. She paid him no mind. But it's harder when you're a single dad. Finn handed Lizzie her puff and took the bottle of bubble bath. I need capable ranch hands, not. He left the sentence incomplete, having been raised not to disrespect others, especially women. But she's broke, Daddy. Lizzie swung her puff by its string. That's what the cowboy said. And we take in broken things. Finn smiled at the Monroes, but when he spoke it was only for his daughter. Look at the nice lady, honey. She's not broken. I am.
The store door closed behind Finn and Kendall was able to breathe again. Finn's gaze had been intense, so focused on her. There'd been no escape, no shrinking back. She felt flushed, as if she'd had her breath stolen by a hot summer wind on a dry Texas day. And yet, she felt the urge to run after Finn and tell him she could help. Like he was the one in need of rescuing, not her. Holden took Finn's flyer from Mackenzie and glanced over it. Room and board plus salary. He looked down at Kendall. You could waive the salary. Kendall huffed. Or at least, she tried to. It came out more like a shaky breath. You just said I needed money. You won't need money if you land the C-Bar-C account in a few weeks. You said so yourself. Holden set a bottle of wine on the counter. This could be your chance to find someone to teach you the inner workings of a large cattle operation. Kendall shook her head. She'd rather wait and see if Shane's fiancée, Franny, would need her at the bucking bull. Finn was just so very unlike her. Finn reminded her of that summer she was 9 in Texas, of struggling and eating dirt, of jokes made at her expense, of failure and embarrassment. She smoothed her hair over one shoulder. Outside the store, Finn put his purchases in his truck, patted a big yellow dog, and then headed toward the bent nickel diner, delicate little daughter in tow, her blonde curls bouncing. Kendall was mesmerized by him. Finn was broad and muscular. He walked with his shoulders square and head high, as if he hadn't been hiding his disfigured, whisker-trimmed cheek most of the time they'd been in the store. What a contradiction! Kendall watched him through the front store windows, taking in his chiseled profile, the fringe of dark brown hair coming out of his worn hat brim, remembering the shockingly blue eyes that dared her to look away. His words, his posture, his attitude. It all said, I don't need anyone. Except he did need someone, or he wouldn't have put up that flyer. But he doesn't need me. That much was clear. Getting hired as a ranch hand is a long shot. Holden paid for his wine. Maybe Finn could use a babysitter or a housekeeper. He could give you a ranch refresher over the dinner you make him. He gave a wry laugh, knowing full well that Kendall couldn't cook. That poked her pride. I can help around a ranch. She lifted her chin, much the way Finn had done. I'm stronger than I look. I've taken Pilates for years. The store clerk was trying hard not to smile. Kendall's pride moved aside to let anger chop out her words. I can do hard things, Holden. Just watch me. She stomped out. Holden and the store clerk laughed as the door swung closed behind her. It began to sprinkle as Kendall marched over to the bent nickel. Raining on my parade. Her arms swung and her boots struck the pavement with confidence. She flung open the diner door and stormed inside, not even pausing to collect herself. Instead, she headed right for the rancher and his daughter, taking the stool to Finn's left, and waved to her cousin Camden behind the counter. I'll have a tea, please. I'll have a tea? She gritted her teeth. She should have asked for a beer, which the diner had recently obtained a license for, if only to prove she was tough enough to work on a ranch. Kendall spun the stool sideways to face the dismissive cowboy. I can help you. I already have a babysitter. She drives up from Boise twice a week. Finn raised a hand, catching Cam's eye. Can you make those milkshake orders to go? I'm a hard worker, Kendall said with her head held high. Finn stared straight ahead, mouth closed. The scars across his cheek were pink with raised, jagged lines. She wanted to trace those lines with her finger and find out if they were as hard as Finn seemed to be. She wanted to look her fill without feeling like her attention was unwanted, like she was unwanted. Kendall tossed her hair over her shoulder. I can vouch for Kendall being a hard worker, Cam said over the roar of the milkshake machine. She's always on her computer or phone. Although Kendall appreciated her cousin's intentions, his comment wasn't helping her case. Finn's mouth thinned. He looked like he hadn't been kissed in a long time, and he was never going to admit that it bothered him. I haven't been kissed in a long time, and it bothers me. She bet Finn was a good kisser. She bet when he took a woman in his arms that he held her close and didn't let go until she was breathless. Kendall sucked in a breath. There was something about this man that got under her skin and wouldn't go away. She didn't understand it, but she didn't back away from it either. She put her forearms on the counter, leaned toward him, and practically shouted, "Test me. Go on. I'll surprise you." His little girl stared at her with wide blue eyes, seemingly already surprised. Finn drew a deep, deliberate breath, and then released it just as slowly as he reached for his wallet and drew out 2 20s. I forgot to buy dog food. Mackenzie knows which brand it is. You load it in my truck and you've got the job on a trial basis. Dog food? Piece of cake. Thank you. You won't regret it. I already do. Finn turned to face her, holding the money between them. Every nuance of his expression conveyed disappointment with life or karma or the human race. It was heartbreaking. Or I will regret it, if you can lift and load the dog food. If you can't get it in my truck by yourself, the deal is off. It felt like all her life someone had been doubting Kendall, trying to tell her what she could and couldn't do. Or worse, how to do what she wanted to do. She was done with it. No problem. Kendall took his 20s and hurried back to the store.
Hey, Finn. Dr. Carlisle entered the bent nickel, baby bump first. She adjusted her thick glasses as she set her sights on Finn, coming to stand next to him at the counter. She placed a hand on his shoulder and angled her head, presumably to look at the surgery scar on the back of his neck. How are you feeling? Chem delivered their milkshakes in paper cups with plastic lids. Fine. Never better. Finn put a straw in Lizzie's shake. Hey, love. Why don't you go sit by the window while I talk to Dr. Carlisle? Lizzie slid off the stool, carrying her chocolate milkshake with both hands as she headed toward a front booth. Meanwhile, Dr. Carlisle paid for her takeout order, accepting 2 large boxes of the dinner special from Cam. Finn, it's been a month. You haven't scheduled the adjuvant therapy. You said you got everything. That came out surlier than he'd meant it to. I did. The doctor gave Finn a reassuring smile. The additional treatment is precautionary but recommended in patients with lesions the size of yours. Lesions. Cancerous growths, she meant. Why didn't doctors say what they meant? Doc, 5 days a week for 4 weeks. Finn's right hand came up to the fresh, bumpy scar on the back of his neck. It was still tender to the touch, kind of like his emotions when discussing the big C. I can't afford any more lost time at the ranch. Fall is a busy season. Life was a busy season. And you said you got it all. Dr. Carlisle's expression didn't change. But winter is coming. Sure. I'm less stretched after the first snowfall. He'd give her that. But when things slowed down, he was going to have to put some effort toward finding someone new to share his life with, apologies to his angel, Jenny. And that someone needed to be committed to raising kids on the McAfee ranch. But that doesn't mean. It's a date, then. And just like that, Dr. Carlisle assumed she'd won. She made a hasty retreat. You made the right decision. Hang on. He stood, grabbing hold of his milkshake. I didn't agree to anything. She paused at the door, looking back at him before nodding toward Lizzie. But you will. And then she left. Grrr. A helpless sort of anger shuddered through his veins, similar to the emotion he'd felt when he was first diagnosed. Similar to the emotion he'd felt after his injury in the service. He hated not being in control. He hated being off schedule. He hated this feeling of brokenness. Finn moved to the booth near the front window and put Lizzie in his lap. They both slurped their chocolate shakes and waited for Kendall to come out of the store with the dog food. The 50-pound bag of dog food. There was no way that slip of a city woman was going to heft that bag out to his truck and toss it in the truck bed. Mommy always said misfits need a home. Lizzie leaned against him, reciting the words he'd told her because she'd barely been 2 when Jenny had died. Mommy always said our hearts are big enough to make room for one more. Why had he told her those things? Kendall Monroe isn't a misfit. She looked like she'd fit in anywhere in the world, except at the McAfee ranch. You heard what the cowboy said, Daddy. She's broke. Lizzie sucked on her milkshake. Broke? Despite what Kendall said, Finn didn't believe that for a minute. Monroe's had money. Everybody knew that. Kendall appeared on the sidewalk in front of their truck, large dog food bag on her shoulder. Finn set down his cup. Lizzie leaned forward. In his truck, Peanut stopped panting and stared at Kendall from the front passenger seat. It had stopped raining. Everyone and everything was on pause. Kendall wobbled on her way to the back of the truck, as if struggling under the weight of the bag, but she got there. And once there, she bent her knees and then rocketed to her toes, throwing the bag off her shoulder. If she hadn't staggered back and nearly fallen, he might have thought he'd completely misjudged her. Cam, who'd been drinking Kendall's tea and watching over Finn's shoulder, chuckled. I guess you've got yourself a ranch hand. A ranch hand. I can't wait. Lizzie excitedly clapped her hands. Can we take our misfit home now, Daddy? She can sleep in my room. She's gonna love the ducklings and Peanut and Chicky Chicken. She's gonna love. No. Finn didn't want his new ranch hand to love anyone. He set Lizzie on the floor as Kendall marched back in the diner, triumph in her big gray eyes. I'll expect you tomorrow morning at dawn, Miss Monroe. My name's Kendall. She handed him his change, smiling with just the right note of triumph and geniality, as if he should be happy about her winning that challenge. Your flyer said room and board. I'll get my things at the lodgepole inn. That way, I can start in the morning. Finn bit back a groan.
Chapter 3. Gabby, you're here. Good. Kendall hurried through the lobby of the lodgepole inn, telling herself she was excited to have found a way to brush up on her ranch skills. Working for a sexy, cantankerous cowboy had nothing to do with the anticipation she was feeling. Can you kitten sit a little longer? Sure. The preteen sat behind the check-in counter with Boo sleeping in her lap. She was wearing a pink tank top that said, "Don't miss out on second chance," and had her strawberry blonde hair in two messy buns high on her head. Kendall stopped to scratch Boo behind the ears. "Boo's a sweetheart, isn't she?" In the manager's apartment behind Gabby, Kendall's cousin Laurel was pacing the kitchen while holding 3-month-old baby girls in each arm. "Boo's mostly a sweetie, but she keeps trying to climb the drapes," Gabby said in a low voice, glancing over her shoulder toward Laurel, her stepmother. "How much longer do you need me to watch her?" "A few days maybe?" Kendall turned toward the stairs, explaining about the opportunity with Finn. "Not so fast." Laurel and the babies entered the lobby. The girls were identical twins, down to their gummy smiles and tufts of fine red hair. They were adorable, but looked as if they'd done a number on Laurel. Her bright red hair had fallen out of her ponytail on one side and her cheeks were flushed. "Gabby, can't kittens it. Summer is over and classes have resumed. Plus, Gabby has 2 little sisters to help care for. We can't have the twins bothering guests." It was a weekday in mid-September. The only guests were Monroes, who'd make allowances for crying babies. Kendall opened her mouth to say so. Behind Laurel and the babies, Gabby sent the high sign to Kendall, warning her not to argue. Heeding that alert, Kendall changed tactics. She walked over to Laurel and took one of the twins before proceeding upstairs to her room. "Look how cute Hope is. That's Hazel." Laurel climbed the stairs right behind Kendall, feet pounding more than was necessary on the creaky treads. "And don't think I don't know what you're doing. You're trying to butter me up. It won't work. I have no idea what you're talking about." Kendall entered her room. She smoothed Hazel's red eyebrows, earning a wiggle of happiness in return. "I'm just trying to give you a little break, Laurel." Kendall lay Hazel down in the middle of the bed, took her sister Hope from Laurel, and put her down, too. Then she took Laurel's hand and drew her to the bathroom doorway, pointing at the mirror. "You need a minute for yourself." Catching her reflection, Laurel made a little mewing noise, much like Boo when she'd been in her carrier too long. Laurel removed her worn scrunchie and vigorously finger-combed her hair. "I love being a mom." "Ooh, that sounded defensive." "You're a great mom." Kendall went around the room, gathering her things together for the move, keeping an eye on the babies on the bed. There wasn't much to pick up since she just dropped off her luggage less than 2 hours ago. After having flown into Boise this morning, she'd spent most of the day at the hospital and the last hour or so taking photos of some refurbished kiddie carnival rides her cousin Bentley was restoring. But even great moms need a break now and then. Laurel faced Kendall, looking more like herself. She arched her thin red eyebrows. "Let's make a deal. You keep Boo for a few days, and I promise to take you to dinner, just you and me. No babies." Kendall tickled Hazel's toes. "No offense, sweet cheeks. I can't leave them." Laurel placed a hand on each baby's belly and gave them a playful shake, eliciting more gooey smiles. "I'm breastfeeding." Kendall slid her laptop into its bag. "Didn't Cousin Sophie have a pump or something when she was breastfeeding her twins? If I pump, it goes in a bottle. Bottle to breast creates nipple confusion. And confusion of any type in babies isn't fun." Laurel's gaze turned distant. "Not fun at all. I take it you've tried this." Laurel nodded. Impulsively, Kendall hugged her cousin. "You're going to be okay. Someday soon, you'll regain the Monroe most likely to keep up appearances crown. How about this? I'll come into town tomorrow for dinner. We'll sit at one table in the bent nickel and your darling husband, Mitch, can sit with the babies at another table." She held Laurel at arm's length. "You'll feel like an adult, I promise. Even wearing a nursing bra?" Laurel's lower lip thrust out. "It's like wearing body armor." Kendall nodded reassuringly. "Even if you wore a girdle. Are you up for it?" "Yes." Laurel's gaze drifted toward the bed. She sighed and stepped free. "But I was serious about the kitten. She can't stay here. Gabby's got school, Mitch is working on the renovation, and I can't watch the twins plus Boo." Laurel faced Kendall, crossing her arms over her chest. You can, and will, take your kitten with you. All right, Kendall said, relenting. Boo is going to be a ranch cat, at least for a few days. She'd be extra careful with the little scamp so that she wouldn't run off into the woods. What's gotten into you with this kitten? Laurel demanded. You've never had a pet before. Not so much as a hamster. Kendall shrugged. I just saw her get dumped and that was that. I realized the moment she looked at me that she was my boo. You know my sweetheart? Kindred souls understood each other. Kind of like the way she'd felt when Finn's eyes locked on hers. Kendall scrunched her nose. That wasn't it at all. There had been no immediate kinship or affection when she and Finn had done the stare down. It was attraction. A simple chemical reaction. What's wrong? Laurel ran her thumb over Kendall's forehead. You're making frown lines. Kendall forced herself to relax. There's no single thing bothering me. There were several: her bank account, the car situation, the job opportunity she desperately needed, and a widowed cowboy's cautious gaze. But she didn't want Laurel to worry. She had enough on her plate. I'll be fine. She'd milk Finn for all his ranching knowledge and be back at the lodgepole in within a few days. A week, tops. Laurel tried to send her off with a smile, but her confidence in Kendall was about as solid as Kendall's confidence in herself. Still, Kendall wasn't a quitter. I'll be fine, she said again. It took Kendall 3 trips to help ferry the twins downstairs and then lug her things to Finn's truck. On the last trip, she spotted her luggage exactly where she'd left it next to the cab and realized that Finn was going to treat her like the ranch hand she was pretending to be, even if it was only temporary. Kendall opened the back door to load her purse, laptop bag, and kitten. Hi. Lizzie looked half asleep. Her blue eyes were droopy and her blonde curls were askew. Hi. Kendall set the cat carrier on the seat and her purse and laptop bag on the floor. Boo meowed. In the front seat, the dog stopped panting and cocked its ears. What's that noise? Finn sat behind the wheel. He turned off what sounded like a lullaby on his phone. Boo meowed again. The dog hopped in the back, batting Lizzie with its tail, whining as it stuck its nose against Boo's carrier, making her hiss. Peanut, stop! Lizzie hollered, wide awake now as she swatted at the dog's tail. Peanut! Finn commanded. He slapped the front seat with his palm. Come. The dog, who is a gazillion times bigger than a peanut, returned to the front, circled and then rested his muzzle on the seat back, watching the cat carrier as if he couldn't wait to make friends with Boo. The kitten isn't coming with us. Finn stared at Kendall, eyes nearly as narrow as the scars making a wishbone on his cheek. Kendall wasn't in the mood to cater to cantankerous cowboys. I rescued Boo from the streets of Philly and brought her out here. There's no way I'm leaving her behind. Forgetting the argument with Laurel, Kendall gave Finn the smile she'd perfected with 2 older brothers before tossing her suitcase, the bag of cat litter and the litter box in the truck bed. They're misfits, Daddy. Lizzie gestured for Kendall to get in and hurry up about it. We have room. Miss Kendall can sleep in my room. Princess Kendall is staying in the bunk room, Finn muttered. That's cowgirl Kendall to you, mister. Kendall took her seat, sliding the cat carrier to the middle, a motion Peanut watched carefully. Finn scowled. I'm your boss, remember? That's cowgirl Kendall to you, boss. Kendall buckled in. Lizzie grinned at her. She's funny, Daddy. Can we keep her? No. Finn backed out of the inn's parking lot. Kendall found the little girl adorable and Finn too rigid. Do you always talk about people as if they aren't within spitting distance? Yes. He had big hands. They moved effortlessly around the steering wheel. Lizzie, don't get attached to the cowgirl princess or her cat.